Good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on where you are across the country. I am Molly Ramsdell, Director of NCSL's Washington, D.C. office, and I want to welcome and thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar, one in a series of COVID-19 related webinars, focuses on housing and homelessness. Before I hand the program over to our host, NCSL President-elect Hawaii Speaker Scott Saiki, I'd like to go through a bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange and engagement, and we hope that it answers your questions and provides new information. Speaking of questions, please use the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen to submit your questions to our presenters. We encourage you to type in your questions and answers if you have them throughout the presentation. We will answer them at the end of the formal presentations. Many of you will want to download the slides from today's webinar. You can find a PDF version of the slides by opening the tab labeled Resources. The tabs are found just above the presentation window. Another tab is labeled Speaker, where you can read the bios of today's speakers. You can access these tabs at any time during the presentation. If you have trouble downloading the presentation, please email Margaret Weil, and that's Margaret, M-A-R-G-A-R-E-T, Weil, W-I-L-E, at ncsl.org, and she will send you the deck of slides. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on NCSL's website early next week. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our host and facilitator of today's webinar, NCSL President-elect Hawaii Speaker Scott Saiki. Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Molly. Good morning to everyone from Hawaii. It's 8:30 here in Hawaii. We'd like to thank everybody for participating today in this webinar. As you know, the purpose of NCSL is to bring all legislatures together so that we can activate in bipartisan policy problem solving. We can learn from each other, and in doing so, our entire nation will benefit from that. The topic for today's webinar is COVID-19, housing, and homelessness. And as everybody knows, throughout all the jurisdictions, our government systems and protocols are being extremely tested, more so with the most vulnerable populations in our communities, and the need for coordination and resources has become more and more apparent. The role of the state legislatures is also more apparent because we are at the center of navigating the myriad of federal, state, and county resources and balancing those to address the immediate needs in our communities. I want to just spend a couple of minutes to let you know what is happening in Hawaii. This situation has really forced the state and county governments to finally try to work together and to coordinate resources. Our homeless shelters are at capacity, and they have also reduced caseloads to accommodate social distancing. On next Tuesday, the Hawaii Supreme Court will also begin releasing inmates. Fortunately, so far, of 6,500 homeless individuals, only one has tested positive. But as I said, this pandemic is causing the state and the counties to work together. In urban Honolulu, a temporary quarantine and isolation center was stood up in a week and a half to serve homeless individuals. The state also created a behavioral health and homeless statewide unified response group to monitor and provide basic services to homeless. We've also increased outreach services to unsheltered individuals and encampments, and we have urged counties to follow CDC guidelines to keep encampments intact. So it is obvious that we are all facing common challenges in our communities. Fortunately, NCSL has organized an expert panel that understands the CARE Act provisions and how other states are responding to crises in the areas of housing homelessness and youth homelessness. And I'd just like to very briefly introduce our four presenters. First, from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, we have Commissioner Brian Montgomery, who is the Assistant Secretary of HUD. He will provide us with an overview of what HUD and the administration is working on relating to housing, homelessness, and COVID-19 impact. Following him, we'll have Michael Quillen, who is a policy associate with the NCSL Labor and Economic Development section, and Michael will provide us with an overview of NCSL's work and what state legislatures are doing. Following him is Jennifer Schwartz, who is the director of the Tax and Housing Advocacy section from the National Council of State Housing Agencies. Jennifer will provide us with an overview of what state housing agencies are doing throughout the United States. And finally, we have Patricia Julianell, who is a Director of Program Advancement and Legal Affairs from Schoolhouse Connection, and she will provide an overview of youth homelessness work that is being conducted throughout the United States. And following the presenters, we'll set aside about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So why don't we begin with Commissioner Montgomery?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and glad to be here joining NCSL members all over the country. Secretary Carson very much wanted to join everyone today and was planning to do so until he was pulled into a White House meeting, but he sends his greetings. And he wanted me to express his great appreciation for your input, your vital insights, and the guidance you're providing to the states as they make some of the most important decisions that affect the health and safety of our communities. We especially appreciate working with all of you to ensure our most vulnerable populations are receiving the care and attention they deserve during this extraordinary health and economic emergency. Well, we want to thank the many people on the call today who are on the front lines of the fight against this coronavirus. Many have been working tirelessly day in and day out to ensure people have food, medicine, and other essential household items, particularly for our senior residents and homeless who are at risk in your states. And I'm grateful to be able to spend a few minutes with you outlining the efforts being undertaken by HUD alongside many of you as our partners with respect to COVID-19. While we haven't seen anything quite like this, a number of the prior crises many of us have lived through, including the aftermath of September the 11th, the 2008 financial crisis, recent natural disasters, and even the government shutdowns have provided difficult but important lessons. We know we're in this together, and that's how we're going to get through it. For each of us, the priority has been first and foremost to help keep people safe and healthy. And HUD has been working with state and local leaders, key HUD partners, including other federal agencies, the White House, and many other stakeholders all over the country, to provide immediate relief to people impacted by COVID-19, including homeowners, renters, and the homeless. And we want to keep people in their homes, prevent any further dislocation, and ensure those at greater risk are taken care of. The homeless population is one of the most vulnerable of groups in the country. They are more likely to have compromised health, which makes this an extremely urgent concern. There are already terrible health risks associated with the homeless population, and unfortunately COVID-19 brought that into even sharper focus. And this is a problem that affects everyone, and one that our team at HUD deals with every day in communities across America. Well, we are in Fair Housing Month, which is one of the most important months of the year in housing. And Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And it is a vital reminder of the work to be done and the commitment we all share for the future. It is never more important than during times of economic stress that we remind ourselves of what truly drives this country and this enterprise, and that's opportunity, fair and equal treatment of people, and decency. And a decent, safe, and affordable place to call home is the foundation from which our people and their families pursue their life dreams and a meaningful life for their families. So as we work together to address the coronavirus, HUD has moved aggressively to address the enormous challenges posed by the homeless population. We're coordinating across federal agencies and with state, local, and tribal leaders. And we will continue to work on legislative packages as they arise and when necessary. We're helping communities respond quickly and providing maximum flexibility in utilizing their CDBG funds so these dollars can be used to assist healthcare and homeless providers of urgently necessary services during this critical time. The CARES Act included an additional $10 billion for our Community Planning and Development Office to help communities with services for senior citizens, the homeless, and public health services. CBD put forth a Herculean effort to allocate and award over $3 billion of new funds provided by Congress, all in record time. I know there is great interest on when those funds will hit accounts and when the next allocation will come. The funds hitting accounts will depend, of course, on how efficiently states and localities can develop their plans and sign an agreement with HUD. But we believe because of the waivers being granted and the expedited process, we could see it as soon as the third week of May, a faster turnaround than normal. In accordance with the CARES Act, the next CDBG allocation of $1 billion will be allocated to the states and insular areas no later than May the 11th. And the remaining $2 billion after that will be allocated on a rolling basis based on unmet needs. Meanwhile, I would like to add our disaster recovery teams remain laser focused on their mission. Communities that wish to amend their CDBG plans can contact their HUD CBD representative if they need assistance. On March 13th, the same day the national emergency was declared by the President, Secretary Carson and I had announced over $118 million in additional support to local homeless assistance programs. And this is in addition to the $2.2 billion in grants announced earlier this year. And the CARES Act added $4 billion more in homeless assistance grants. These funds are designed to help contain the spread of coronavirus among homeless individuals. They are there to provide state, local, and tribal governments with homelessness prevention funding for individuals and families who would otherwise become homeless due to coronavirus. And we are working closely with the governors of states with significant increases in unsheltered and chronic homelessness. And we are very pleased that Governor Newsom in California is taking bold action to help this vulnerable population. Secretary Carson, as you know, is both HUD Secretary and world-renowned physician, is heavily involved as a member of the President's Coronavirus Task Force. At the direction of Secretary Carson, HUD has developed an infectious disease toolkit for Continuum of Care Homeless Shelters, CMCs. This document includes specific guidance for preparedness in shelters and encampment settings. And HUD has also provided technical assistance on infectious disease preparedness and mitigation of those CFCs who have requested it. HUD's Office of Special Needs Assistance Programs, known as SNAPS, is strongly encouraging homeless assistance providers, especially shelter providers, to take measures to prevent and manage its spread, including the coordination of medical care for residents who are ill. Now, turning to our work on behalf of low-income renters, for both Section 8 multifamily contract holders and public housing, HUD is ensuring that all housing assistance payments, operations funding, and other funding streams continue to be obligated throughout this period of uncertainty. For example, all 2020 multifamily project-based rental assistance contracts, Section 202 contracts for the elderly, and Section 811 contracts for low-income persons with disabilities were fully funded before the outbreak. Through the CARES Act, we have received supplemental funding for all three accounts, including an additional $1 billion in funds for owners and sponsors of properties receiving project-based assistance. This is for reduced tenant payments as a result of the coronavirus. We received an additional $50 million for the elderly Section 202 program, which includes up to $10 million for service coordinators. And finally, an additional $15 million for low-income persons with disabilities in our Section 811 program. The CARES Act established a 120-day moratorium on evictions for the public housing and housing choice voucher programs. After the 120-day period expires, all notices to vacate must provide the tenant with a 30-day notice. And the CARES Act provided HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing, PIH, with $2.24 billion in supplemental funding, which includes $1.25 billion for tenant-based rental assistance. And again, these are for individuals who lose their jobs as a result of the coronavirus. $850 million for administrative expenses, $400 million in housing assistance payments, $685 million for the Public Housing Operating Fund, $300 million for Native American programs to provide flexibility to local tribal governments to respond to conditions on the ground and to meet additional needs, $200 million for Formula Native American Housing Block Grants, and $100 million for Indian Community Development Block Grants. The bill also established a moratorium on foreclosures and foreclosure-related evictions under HUD's Office of Native American Programs, known as ONAP. This is through the Section 184 and Section 184A loan guarantee programs. And it provides ONAP program borrowers experiencing a financial hardship caused by the coronavirus the right to request and receive forbearance relief. It also includes an additional $65 million in HOPWA funds to benefit low-income persons living with HIV/AIDS and their families. In short, the CARES Act provides additional and broad waiver authority and flexibilities to allow CPD, PIH, and FHA and our partners to continue the mission of providing decent, safe, and affordable housing. Now, that includes support for multifamily lenders, for appraisers, and other stakeholders who continue to work on new originations virtually so that the housing market can provide safe, decent, and affordable housing. And we want to keep the provision of multifamily housing moving in anticipation of the other side of this crisis. And there is a great need for affordable housing, and individuals on the line can attest. Our single-family team at HUD, meanwhile, has been in overdrive to ensure current homeowners with FHA mortgages who are struggling due to COVID-19 have some relief. For anyone with an FHA loan experiencing a hardship, HUD took immediate action. On March 18th, just a few days after the President declared a national emergency, we declared a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions of borrowers with FHA-insured single-family mortgages for 60 days. We'll obviously evaluate the length of that policy as needed in the days and weeks ahead. FHA also issued a temporary waiver related to the in-person contact that is part of early default intervention. And in accordance with the CARES Act, we swiftly issued a mortgagee letter with loss mitigation options for single-family borrowers affected by COVID-19. And these policies should ease the stress of both borrowers and servicers. Now, servicers must offer borrowers a forbearance if the borrower is experiencing a financial hardship as a result of COVID-19 for up to 6 months to start and up to an additional 6 months more if requested. That allowance may include one or more periods of reduced or suspended payments. As long as the borrower is on a forbearance plan, the lender servicer must waive all late charges, fees, and penalties. The loss mitigation home retention options are available to single-family borrowers and include senior borrowers with FHA-insured reverse mortgages or home equity conversion mortgages known as HECMs by extending important deadlines. To help our seniors affected by COVID-19, the HECM provision includes delays on calling the loans due and payable, such as when the borrower enters a health care facility due to COVID-19. This policy also extends timelines and temporarily adjusts requirements for HECM claims to reduce burdens on servicers. We've also prioritized the use of the so-called stand-alone partial claim for FHA-insured loans, which was used extensively following the 2017 hurricanes. This option allows borrowers to stay in their homes without an increase in payment or term to their mortgages. Now, there have been media reports and letters that incorrectly state borrowers will be on the hook for lump sum payments immediately following the COVID-19 forbearance period. Let me be very clear. For an FHA-insured loan, a lump sum payment is not required immediately following the COVID-19 forbearance period. The COVID-19 National Emergency Standalone Partial Claims are designed to be used once a borrower's COVID-19 forbearance period ends, if they are able to resume their prior payment. If a mortgage was current or less than 30 days past due as of March 1st, 2020, a borrower is eligible for the partial claim. To ensure that this process is smooth for both borrowers and servicers, we are developing a new portal to receive and process the standalone partial claims within FHA's new cloud platform known as FHA Catalyst, which is our fortuitously timed aggressive effort to modernize our aging IT infrastructure. We expect this functionality to be ready by June, right about the time we should start seeing the first COVID-19 partial claims. Now, for borrowers who do not qualify for the COVID-19 standalone partial claim at the end of their forbearance period, lenders are required to evaluate them for other loss mitigation options. In total, the options we've outlined allow borrowers facing financial hardship due to COVID-19 to stay in their homes now and to hopefully bring their mortgage current in the future. The policy also waives late fees and penalties and suspends negative credit reporting. This will provide significant relief and ease of stress for borrowers and servicers alike. We are doing everything possible to provide that relief and to keep families in their homes and the flexibility to get through this crisis. As with multifamily, we have put in place a variety of solutions for lenders, appraisers, and other stakeholders so that they can continue to work on new originations virtually minimizing the majority of the on-site or in-person work usually required. These include the electronic submission of documents, e-closings, electronic notarizations, and electronic securitizations. For single family, our technology team fast-tracked the use of our new platform for the electronic document delivery system for lenders who do not have delegated authority to endorse loans on our behalf. And there are 100 to 200,000 of these loans each year. The retooling was frankly developed and released in only 9 business days. And we are now proudly accepting the large paper binders electronically on this new platform. And as of close of business yesterday, we received over 8,500 case binders in the new platform. And for appraisal inspections, FHA has instituted new flexibilities for both forward reverses and reverse mortgages. Then we allow for exterior or what are called desktop-only inspections for most purchase transactions. We've also issued a temporary handbook waiver to allow lenders to electronically submit condominium project approval applications instead of mailing their submissions. And we announced the broadest possible accommodation so that those in the process of buying a home or refinancing to continue on their path. Moreover, to support the forbearance and loss mitigation efforts and ensure our programs work efficiently for FHA single-family borrowers, HUD's Ginnie Mae has provided a liquidity facility to securities issuers who need help advancing principal and interest payments to investors during this nationwide emergency. Our multifamily office is currently working with Ginnie Mae to provide a multifamily component to this pass-through assistance program, as it's known, for servicers facing a temporary liquidity shortfall related to coronavirus. Now, this is a last resort liquidity vehicle, but it underscores Ginnie Mae's unwavering commitment to the timely payment of scheduled principal and interest to investors holding our MBS in all market conditions. Well, all our actions together will ensure HUD continues to provide relief to support the American people and to maintain its role as a counter-cyclical port in the storm. Well, thank you again for letting me share what we're doing at HUD, and I want to thank all of you for your diligence and attention to the needs of our most vulnerable populations throughout the country. Secretary Carson and I appreciate your leadership and your continued cooperation as we work together during this extraordinary time. And I'm looking forward to working with you further as we continue this fight as one country, united in a common cause. Thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to the speaker. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your the federal update and for your insight on all of these programs. And we appreciate you being here this morning with us. Our next presenter is Michael Quillen, who is from the NCSL, and he'll provide an update on what state legislatures are doing. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I dive in and give an update as to what state legislatures are doing and what resources we have at NCSL, I wanted to provide sort of a quick update of things that could potentially come down the pike federally for our members. We're not monitoring a couple of issues here, the first being the need for an additional stimulus package, of which would include more funding for housing and homelessness programs. There have been talks about a Stimulus 4 or Stimulus 3.5, if you will, that will include funding for infrastructure. And knowing the severity of the housing crisis and homelessness crisis, we are monitoring to see whether housing and homelessness is formulated in the definition of infrastructure to provide more funding. An additional area that we are closely monitoring is how the federal government works to alleviate the burden of homeowners, specifically ones with non-federally backed mortgages. An overwhelming 4.4 million people filed for unemployment last week, which means paychecks are not being deposited, which ultimately means rent and mortgages aren't being paid, and food is not on the table for a lot of families. So as we begin to discuss infrastructure funding, housing, and other programs that support our homelessness population, we believe this should be included in that discussion. So with that, we will now turn over to what state legislatures are doing. So far, at least, there are 21 bills that have been introduced to combat the housing and homelessness crisis. And as it stands currently with the pandemic, there are 22 states and territories that are adjourned or suspended due to the virus, which are including Guam and the Virgin Islands. 10 states of which are still in session, 12 are adjourned sine die. 5 states have not convened this year, and 3 are in special sessions. So as we go back to the bills, 11 of those would establish a program to provide assistance for either the tenant, landlord, or both. 9 specifically deal with the prohibition of evictions for both or either the tenant or the landlord. And then 1 bill suspends interest payment collections. As we turn, and I wanted to highlight one specific bill in California that was introduced, Senate Bill 939. It prohibits the eviction of tenants of real property, including businesses and nonprofit organizations. And I think one of the things about this bill that makes it very interesting is that it makes it a misdemeanor to evict a tenant. We are also seeing, as our HUD spokesperson mentioned, Governor Newsom has launched Project Room Key, which secures 15,000 rooms in hotels and motels for homelessness individuals. The state of California had entered into a cost-share agreement with FEMA to establish a program that would provide 75% of the funds to come from the federal government, while the remaining 25% will be left up to California to provide. In addition to this funding, the California General Assembly allocated $150 million that will be provided to local governments to support their efforts to combat homelessness, assist in identifying hotels, negotiate and execute operating agreements, and to provide technical assistance. State and local entities are targeting hotels in counties with significant homeless populations that are also at the same time experiencing high levels of COVID-19 contractions. And I would like to point out that as of yesterday, there was over 11,000 rooms that have been secured, with over 4,200 homeless people now having a safe shelter over their head. Switching gears to New York, New York has actually introduced the most legislation around housing assistance and homelessness. Of those, there are 6 measured, all centered around rental assistance. I wanted to highlight 3 specific bills for us. Assembly Bill 10247 and Senate Bill and its companion, Senate Bill 8139. It establishes a rent waiver for individuals that cannot afford to pay rent due to the virus. And if a tenant's lease is about to expire during this COVID crisis, this emergency, those people are able to extend their lease up to 90 days as a result of this. And any landlord that has lost rental income due to the virus may also apply for relief under the Division of Housing and Community Renewal. And of these bills, the funds will be coming through and funneled through the Rental Assistance Fund through New York. So switching gears, Senate Bill 8119 establishes no rental payments for both tenants and small businesses, and it further clarifies residential mortgage forbearance to be in place for 90 days. So if we then scale it down to the city level, the New York Department of Housing Preservation and Development requested that owners of city-funded buildings with income-targeted housing to allocate up to 30% of those apartments for homeless people. While there is no requirement for developers to adhere to this, DHP has said that they would use the city rental voucher money to pay for the rent. And I would like to add that the stipulation here where it says establishes no rental payments for both tenants and small businesses, that span of time is at the discretion of Governor Cuomo, and it is upon his approval or written agreement of an executive order establishing such. So of those 21 measures that I had went over previously, only 2 have been enacted. Arizona Senate Bill 1690 establishes the Crisis Contingency and Safety Net Fund, which is $50 million to be spent for economic assistance for housing, the homeless, and small business and food bank operations during the coronavirus public health emergency. The other bill that was enacted was New Jersey Assembly Bill 3859, which allows Governor Murphy to suspend any evictions and foreclosures during the outbreak. While legal proceedings can still go ahead, the actual removal of those residents is prohibited for the duration of the virus. And I wanted to switch gears a little bit to sort of go over and highlight the top 3 issues that we at NCSL have been getting from our members in terms of informational requests. The first, overwhelmingly, is evictions for individuals and families. Second, monetary assistance for landlords and rent relief for individuals. And lastly, one that most people may not be familiar with, which is Medicaid funds and use of rent. As of right now, you cannot use Medicaid or your Medicaid payments to support your rent. However, it can be used to provide a down payment or other sort of assistance, but it cannot be used specifically for that. So those are the 3 areas that we are looking at in detail and have been getting a lot of feedback from our members on. So with that, I wanted to turn to our resources that we've been putting out. We have 3 documents, 2 documents, one of which is the CARES Act analysis, which highlights all of the funding mechanisms, highlights everything in terms of the housing and homelessness programs and what this means for states. You can find this on our website as well. And an additional document or a blog that we put together was sort of the human services and housing analysis of the previous package and what this looks like for our members. And just this past week, we had launched the Housing and Homelessness State Legislature Database, which houses all legislation dealing with housing and homelessness. So you can keyword search, you can highlight, you can do everything related to housing and homelessness. Every bill is in there, which can also be found on our website, and the link is in this PowerPoint as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Speaker Psyche.
Thank you, Michael, for your work on this topic and for your comprehensive and timely information. Our next presenter is Jennifer Schwartz from the National Council of State Housing Agencies, and she'll provide us with an update on the work of state housing agencies. Jennifer.
Thank you, Speaker. First of all, I want to thank NCSL for having me here today. Very happy to have this opportunity to present to you about the work of state housing finance agencies and what we really feel that we need moving forward to address this crisis. So with that, just a little bit of background on NCSHA. The National Council of State Housing Agencies is the national association trade group that represents all of the state housing finance agencies across the states. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the state housing finance agency in your state, but generally state HFAs administer a number of housing programs. They issue bonds for both single family and multifamily housing usually. They administer the low-income housing tax credit program, which is the primary driver of rental production of multifamily properties. And they often administer a lot of HUD programs, so we work very closely with Deputy Secretary Montgomery and others at HUD. Of course, they administer a lot of state housing programs. So with that, I'm going to just go ahead and get started. So I think it's really important to keep in mind as we talk about what the needs are right now for housing assistance generally, that we started this before the pandemic with a major housing crisis. There were 37.8 million households, both renters and homeowners, that were paying more than 30% of their income for housing back in 2017. And 30% of one's income is the standard that HUD sets as generally what you should be aiming for in regards to how much money you spend each month on your housing costs. So it should be less than 30%. Also, 1 in 4 renters spend more than half of their income for housing, which leaves very little left over for many of the other necessities that families have: medicine, food, savings, of course. And this is not just impacting the poorest households, although they are certainly the most impacted, but also a lot of middle-income households who work full-time and still are really struggling with their housing costs. So that's where we started before the COVID-19 pandemic started to ravage our country. But over the last 5 weeks, we've had 26.5 million individuals file for unemployment. So that is seriously compounding the housing crisis that we already had. And the concern is that without federal investment, we're going to see a lot of both renters and homeowners who are in danger of losing their housing, either being evicted once the eviction moratoriums or foreclosing once the foreclosure moratoriums have passed, which is going to be a significant problem. Obviously, I think that this crisis is going to be longer lasting than any of us would like, even if we were all able to go back to normal tomorrow. The repercussions are going to be pretty massive. And then, of course, the federal investment is needed to prevent homelessness. I think in particular, we all know the public health implications of homelessness, and also as people are evicted, they're more likely to be bunking up with others, and which makes social distancing very difficult. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I know that the Deputy Secretary went through a number of the things that HUD is doing and how the CARES Act provided additional funding for HUD, but this is just a breakdown of the various HUD programs that received revenue in the CARES Act. And as you can see, there was a significant amount, $5 billion for the Community Development Fund, which is where the Community Development Block Grant comes from, $4 billion for homeless assistance, plussing up of the rental assistance, both the tenant-based and the project-based accounts, to account for the fact that individuals who are currently benefiting from those programs are probably going to see a reduction in income, which means that the cost of their rental assistance goes up for the federal government, and a number of other provisions in that bill that provided additional housing resources going forward. So $12 billion definitely seems like a lot, but we probably need a lot more. Some other things that were in the CARES Act that relate to housing, there was authority given to Treasury to provide liquidity for state and local municipal bond issuers. This is something that we're really going to need. The municipal bond market has been a little bit rocky, and generally there was also authority provided to Treasury and the Fed so they could do more to help servicers, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. As has been previously noted, there's a 60-day foreclosure moratorium and also up to 360 days of forbearance for single-family properties. And that's you could have a first 180-day period and then apply for a second 180-day period of forbearance. On the multifamily side, there is up to 90 days of forbearance for residential mortgage loan payments for multifamily properties. And then a 120-day moratorium on eviction filings. And again, that's in various tranches, but up to 120 days total for that. Which brings us to where we are right now. What do we still need? Obviously, Congress took a very important first step in passing the CARES Act, but there's still a lot of needs that are unmet that we're hoping can move forward, some of which would have to happen through additional legislation and other things that can be done by the administration now. So starting off with forbearance provisions under the CARES Act, obviously very well-intentioned, very needed, but that they are placing a burden on mortgage servicers who are still obligated to make their payments to investors. When you have foreclosure moratoriums and eviction moratoriums, which are incredibly important, that means that multifamily owners and obviously owners of those single-family properties aren't going to be able to make their payments to their servicers, but the servicers still need to be able to pay forward to investors. So one of the things that NCSHA has been pushing for is a mortgage servicer funding facility that would provide that kind of liquidity for servicers and protect residents, both multifamily and homeowners as well. Unfortunately, At the moment, Secretary Mnuchin has been resisting calls, not just from organizations like NCSHA, but also bipartisan calls from members of Congress to create this kind of mortgage servicer funding facility. This is something that we think is unfortunate. While we are very supportive and are grateful for the actions that have been taken by Ginnie Mae and by FHFA to help, this is something that we feel that those actions don't go far enough, and that we're still going to have a major problem in the housing finance system unless the Fed and Treasury act on this. Forbearance is also creating problems for new mortgage loans, and that's because when a new loan is made, it can't be securitized if the borrower doesn't make their first payment. So we've been talking about various solutions to this, one of which would be just to allow Fannie and Freddie to purchase loans that are in forbearance, regardless of their delinquency status. And that apparently seems to be moving forward, so I think we're making some progress there. And then generally on housing bond liquidity, again, this is something where the Federal Reserve and Treasury could do more to allow for greater liquidity in the bond market. And then lastly on this list is just getting additional guidance and waivers from the IRS and HUD. And I have to say HUD has done a really good job at being fast-acting, getting out waivers to all of its grantees for a number of programs. They have done a great job with the Home Investment Partnership Program, so we give them a lot of credit there. I know that they're working on more regulatory guidance on the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program. So a lot of things are in the works, and I know that there's more to come from HUD. The IRS, we're still really in need of some guidance from them in relationship to both the low-income housing tax credit program and some things around tax-exempt bonds, where there are certain deadlines and things that state agencies aren't going to be able to make, or owners aren't going to be able to meet deadlines. So more needs to be done over there. And then from a congressional perspective, $12 billion might seem like a lot of money, but really, given the scope of this problem, we think we're going to need an awful lot more. There's a proposal that's in both the House and the Senate that we're hoping is going to make it into this next major package that's being debated right now for a $75 billion fund called for what's being called the Housing Assistance Fund, and that is money that would go to state housing finance agencies so that they could help homeowners make mortgage payments, make utility payments, even help them with broadband since that's so critical while we're all working from home. So that is one of the things that is one of NCSHA's top priorities. Setting a minimum housing credit rate for properties that are financed with multifamily bonds. These are low-income housing tax credit properties. This gets a little bit weedy, but basically what you need to know is that the properties that are financed with multifamily bonds, the amount of housing credit equity that they're eligible for depends on federal borrowing rates. And with federal borrowing rates being essentially zero at the moment, it is reducing the amount of equity that can go into properties that are being built right now. The problem with this is that, of course, there are a lot of properties in the pipeline which weren't expecting to see the housing credit rate go as low as it has, and that has caused significant funding gaps for those properties that are really going to face problems getting finished. Emergency rental assistance. This is going to be one of the major things that we will need in the next spending bill. I think that, we're very pleased that people were able to get the stimulus checks and the increased unemployment checks, but that's not going to cover all of the rental needs that we're all facing. We're hearing from our members all the time about the need for additional rental assistance, that they are just getting bombarded with needs in their state. And so that is critical, and I'm glad that NCSL is focused on that as well. We're also looking for an increase in the Home Investment Partnerships Program, which is a really important block grant that's very flexible, that can be used for both home ownership and rental housing, and goes to states and localities. And then lastly on this list is a program that used to exist called the Federal Financing Bank Option for FHA, HFA, multifamily risk-sharing loans, which provided greater liquidity for those loans that no longer exists, and we'd like to see that get started again. It would be very helpful during the pandemic. So one of the things that I was asked to talk about is how state housing finance agencies are responding, and they're doing an awful lot. They are standing up, many of them are standing up new rental assistance programs, looking around trying to get whatever resources they can for those rental assistance programs, because that seems to be one of the first needs that they're seeing amongst people in their states. Many of these are new programs that are really specific to the COVID pandemic. And I think they're doing a really good job of jump-starting these programs at a difficult time with everyone working from home. But that's one of the things that a lot of state housing finance agencies have been focused on. Also working just with any other program recipients, landlords, to deal with drops in income that households are having right now, and making sure that that's not going to impact their programs. Restarting, many states had administered a program called the Hardest Hit Fund for homeownership, which was created during the 2008 financial crisis. And those that had funding left in that pot were able to move that money around and use it to help for mortgages, so provide mortgage assistance. So that's been one of the things that many states are trying to do. They're doing a lot to help support homeless shelters and funding temporary homeless shelters, since many of these shelters are either overflowing or they've had public health emergencies that have been causing problems for homeless shelters. Suspending site inspections. Again, I know that this can sound a little bit weedy, but we're in a very difficult time where we're not able to go in and do the kinds of site inspections, and owners of properties aren't able to be there for site inspections to keep up with our regular requirements under a number of programs. And so state agencies are trying to be very responsive and flexible with owners and everybody else that they work with. And then lastly, just implementing all of the various waivers and other guidance that's coming down from federal agencies. NCSHA is a great resource for you all. One of the things that we have done is created a COVID-19 webpage that provides links to documents or programs that all of our state agencies are doing, any policy that they have put in place that is in response to the pandemic. We've been trying to collect those so that you can see what they're doing, so that the public can see what they're doing, but also so that other states can learn from each other about the various policies and programs that are going into effect. So there's quite a lengthy list on our website, and I would just encourage people to check it out. We're also keeping up with all of our advocacy work on the website, so you can see all of the letters that we've sent either to Congress or to folks within the administration, and all of the other work that we're doing and our various policy priorities and how we see those being implemented. And lastly, it's also kind of a catch-all place for a lot of the work that's being done by various federal agencies in regards to housing. We're trying to be a consolidated source for all of that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Speaker Psyche, and happy to answer questions once we're all done.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for that very comprehensive update. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. The final panelist is Patricia Giuliano from Schoolhouse Connection, and she has an update on youth homelessness. Patricia.
Thanks very much. I'm happy to be here with everyone today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Schoolhouse Connection, we're a national nonprofit organization working to overcome homelessness through education. And we specifically work on state policy. We're working in about 30 states right now on state policy to help support youth and young people experiencing homelessness. Thinking about what's happening with youth homelessness right now during the COVID-19 crisis, it's really exacerbating challenges that were already in place, as well as creating some new ones. So for example, we know that young people experiencing homelessness move around a lot, and we're seeing that mobility increasing now. A lot of our youth who are staying temporarily with others, some people call that couch surfing, they're getting forced out of those environments because of concerns about spreading the virus. A lot of those youth are still working because they might be working in grocery stores or other jobs that are considered essential, and the people they're staying with don't want them coming back and bringing that into the house, or just increased tensions with so many people living in a small space. This is a population that actually is about 75% of young people experiencing homelessness nationally do not live in shelters. They are not outside. They are going from couch to couch and house to house because that's really the only option that's available to them. Oftentimes, those are trafficking environments, dangerous environments for them, but it's really all they have available. But we're seeing a lot of that housing falling apart and youth not having a place to go. We've also seen dorms close. A lot of people don't realize that about 17% of college students experience homelessness over the course of a single school year. So when college dorms are closing, and some of those have even been closed and are now being used as homeless shelters, which is ironic because the students who had been living in those dorms, who were forced to leave those dorms, are now experiencing homelessness because so many of our college students actually don't have a home to go to when the school year is over. So we're seeing a lot of that mobility and invisibility. Most of the conversation and policy around homelessness has been about single adults, unsheltered and chronically homeless individuals, which are definitions that our young people don't meet. And so they're not eligible for a lot of the support that's coming out from federal, state, and even local governments. So we have a lot of invisibility around this population, as well as vulnerability that's increasing at this particular time. We also have some particular populations that are being hit, I think, especially hard. I already mentioned college students. As schools close, that was a key source of support for them, and they don't have that any longer. Also, their on-campus and even off-campus jobs in some places have closed. So now they have no place to live and no income and no access to a lot of the federal benefits, including SNAP, because if they can't work, they can't access that. So that's a population that's particularly vulnerable and I think particularly invisible right now. Although there was a New York Times article just last week chronicling a student who had to leave his dorm and ended up staying in a house with 10 people, people coming and going in and out to jobs and worried about the health effects of that. Minors also have very special challenges. This is another population that people don't always think about, but national research finds that out of 30 young people, one of them will experience homelessness over the course of the year, and that's just minors. That's just youth aged 13 to 17 years old. So we're looking at about 700,000 youth under 18 who are experiencing homelessness completely on their own. Again, they're not able to access most of the public assistance that's coming out because they're under 18 and they don't meet a lot of the eligibility requirements. And then they're also even not able to access a lot of community services that require parent or guardian signature or consent. So they tend to be very invisible and very left out. Young parents, again, another invisible population. About half of young women ages 18 to 24 who are homeless are pregnant or parenting, which means that for all of those young women experiencing homelessness, there are babies and toddlers experiencing homelessness. Who right now, again, are not able to access preschool programs, Head Start programs, probably having difficulty accessing childcare and needing assistance with that. And the last thing I'd mention about needs is we know that there is an increase in homelessness happening right now among children and youth, and we do expect that to increase over the course of the summer and into the fall. So state policy support is really critical to help this population. Just a few ideas of what state legislators can do to help this population. The first would be to get in touch with your governors, your state agencies around housing and education that are getting significant federal resources right now, and make sure that some of those resources are targeted to youth experiencing homelessness specifically, whether those are resources going out to elementary and secondary schools, whether they're going out to higher education, whether it's governor's funding or the Emergency Solution Grant housing funding. A lot of that is going out directly through existing housing and continuum of care structures that, again, are going to be focused on those unsheltered and chronically homeless individuals and are going to miss youth and young people. So getting in touch with those, with your colleagues there on the executive side of things, to find out what's happening with that aid and how can it be targeted to make sure that youth experiencing homelessness can get some safety and some basic needs of support right now. Making sure that personnel that are providing services to homeless youth are able to work, that they're considered essential personnel, and that they're supported in that outreach. Again, with the increased invisibility around youth homelessness right now, if we don't have people reaching out and looking and trying to find and help those youth, they're going to be invisible and again, not get access to the resources that are there. That goes to the idea of supporting education generally. Again, given the targeting of homeless and housing and urban assistance funds and a lot of the state funds that are coming out being targeted towards single adults, a lot of times the only agency that was serving youth experiencing homelessness was the public school, and now the schools are closed. So we know schools are still doing a tremendous amount of work on outreach and basic needs support. So providing support to that agency to reach this population of vulnerable youth is really important. You can also take a look at minor consent rules. We have some documents on our website that go through state to state, the rules around minor consent to health care, to mental health care, to housing. A lot of state legislators have been very active on that issue recently. So you can get some information there on our website and look at some examples from different states. And also in talking about eviction moratoriums, look at extending those to motels, to Airbnbs, and other kinds of informal accommodations that happen to be where people experiencing homelessness, including young people, find themselves a lot of the time. So again, there's our COVID-19 webpage where you can get resources that we're putting out related to this particular disaster. And there's our state policy page where you can see what are some of the state laws that have been passed that are being currently considered. And you're welcome to contact me at any time for more information or support.
Okay, thank you very much, Patricia, for your information and for your update. So now we're on Q&A, and if it's okay with everyone, could we go over time by about 10 minutes, because we do have a few questions, and I just want to ask if we could kind of like do speed Q&A if that's possible. So the first question is, where is the best summary on federal COVID funding for homelessness? Where's the best summary? Does anybody know?
This is Brian Montgomery. There is a lot of information on the HUD.gov website. In fact, if you go to that website, there's a banner that said COVID-19 information. Click here, and there's a pretty good breakdown of the funding, including funds we put out earlier this year.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. Then our next question is from Michael. What are the periods of applicability for the state housing bills?
So the answer sort of depends on the state. It could range from when the crisis is or when it ends to the day after the crisis. So it really ultimately depends on the specific bill, if there's a sunset clause or if there's an actual date of the enactment. So like I said, it specifically depends on the bill, where it is, and what that looks like.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, if the CARES Act expires on December 31st, 2020, how will housing assistance be continued beyond that date?
Well, this is Brian Montgomery. It depends on what tranche of money. Some programs go beyond that. But remember, all that funding was supplemental. We have regular funding that comes through our appropriation. Gets $52 billion a year. The overwhelming majority of which goes to housing, community development programs. So, this money will come out. Different tranches will have different requirements in terms of when the funds need to be obligated and spent.
I guess, Commissioner, as a follow-up, I know it's hard to answer this question, but do you anticipate that there will be, COVID-4, COVID-5 bills in the near future?
I sure hate the handicap legislation. It appears that both parties have been negotiating, I think, in good faith. And I know we speak to the folks up on the Hill, the White House, regularly. Again, it's hard to say what may be in the form of a 4, or if there's ever a 5. And we certainly have received a fair amount. HUD's gotten close to $13 billion through the CARES Act, which is almost 25% of our annual funding. So we'll wait and see what direction Congress wants to go in the administration. And but I do know we've been pretty engaged with staff up on the Hill, both Republican and Democrat, and a lot of stakeholder groups. We've been having calls like this is probably my 25th, 30th one I've had from National Fair Housing Alliance, National Income Coalition, Mortgage Bankers Association, you name it. So we'll see where that goes in the days and weeks ahead.
Okay, thanks. We have another CARES Act question. Can the current CARES Act funding be used to provide infrastructure for affordable housing?
Well, I'll ask the NCSHA. Probably can break that down a lot easier than I can.
Yeah, a lot of the a lot of the funding provisions that are in the CARES Act are not for infrastructure programs. Obviously, the CDBG piece, some of it could be used for infrastructure, but I don't know how different grantees are going to use that. But I think that we are going to need a significant investment on the infrastructure side as part of the recovery. And because the construction industry right now has been hitting obviously so many delays, it's going to have a major impact on our ability to move projects forward over the next few years. So we're hoping that more can be done from an infrastructure perspective in the coming package, which we hope comes.
Okay, did anybody else want to add to that question? Okay, we have another question. By what date do states need to use the COVID funds? And do you have a sense of how most states are now planning to use the currently available funds? I'm not sure if we have to distinguish between there's a lump sum tranche of funds versus the grant or line item funds. I'm not sure if there's different deadlines for the use of the two tranches.
Yeah, this is Brian Montgomery. I don't want to get too far over my skis since I'm the FHA commissioner, but I do know that there were different deadlines, different tranches. Remember, this coincided with a lot of funding we'd already put out earlier this year. So, again, I think it's going to depend on what tranche of funding it is.
Does anybody know if there's a website that details the deadlines for the different funds or programs?
It'll more than likely be on the HUD website. And remember, some of these pots of money we're still waiting to get out, as I mentioned in my comments. But we add to this website several times a day. So if it's not up there now, it ultimately will be.
Okay. Let's see. I think there's one more question here. What is the status of the remaining $3 billion in ESG pursuant to the Secretary's discretion?
That I'll have to find out, Mr. Speaker. I can look that up and get back to your staff.
Okay. Thank you.
And this is very much a moving target, as you know. This funding, came in beyond what we normally get, so we're moving quickly as we can. But happy to follow up after I get back to the office.
Thanks. We know that just things are just changing literally by the hour, and that has been for the past month or so. Okay, so I think those are all of the questions that have been sent in to us. Are there any other questions? If not, there's one more question. Are any of the funds going to target victims of, I'm assuming it's domestic violence who become homeless? Yeah, so are any of the funds going to target victims of domestic violence who become homeless?
Well, speaking from HUD, I couldn't tell you specifically. I know we have some programs that we work with the Department of Justice on, separate and above from CARES Act funding. But again, I'm happy to check with that staff.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. For states that don't have the funds to provide direct rental assistance to renters, will there be any flexibility for using CDBG funding that states receive directly to provide that type of assistance?
Well, our funding that we got, this is Brian Montgomery again, that we got through the CARES Act, provides additional funding to make up the tenant portion, of the TBRA program, and also on the project-based rental assistance side. So it was a fairly large tranche of money that's broken down in different categories, which I went through during my remarks. So I can only speak for the pots of money that we have that are for PIH, project-based rental assistance, FHA, 202 and 811.
Okay. I think this question was also kind of geared on the flexibility issue. So, generally speaking, is there has the rate of approval of waivers been pretty high so far?
I have never seen anything like it.
Okay.
I mean, we are putting out more waivers than I thought were humanly possible.
Okay.
Yeah, we are putting out a lot of waivers. I mean, a little inside baseball here. We have inspectors general and GAO, and so far I have to admit they've all been pretty good about understanding the predicament around these are lives, people's livelihoods, and we've been moving very quickly and just trying to keep up. So we've been. Our orders are let's get the help to the people. Let's make sure we have a roof over their head. Make sure we provide the environment where they can be safe and not have to worry about having a roof over their head. And then we'll let the rest of it catch up as it may.
Okay.
This is Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll say that's been our mindset. Just to, there's a heightened sense of urgency, like I've never seen.
This is Jennifer with NCSHA. I just want to thank Assistant Secretary Montgomery for that, because we really agree that HUD has been doing a fantastic job of being very flexible, being very responsive to the things that at least my organization has requested, and we've been really pleased with the waivers that we've seen come out of HUD so far.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you, Jennifer and Commissioner. And waivers is one area that NCSL has prioritized to provide flexibility to the states. So we are out of time now. I wanted to just make a brief announcement. If you could, please note that NCSL does have a webpage for COVID-19. It is found at ncsl.org, and it's very comprehensive. So if you're able to, please take a look at it. We just want to thank all of our presenters for your time and expertise this morning and for answering questions. Thank you to the NCSL staff for organizing this event, and thank you to the audience for participating. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time and for your work on these important issues. And stay safe, and we'll see you next time at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to participate.
Thanks.